welcome, come in. I'm Trisha. I'm going to be talking to you today about troubleshooting your Maven and Gradle builds with BuildScan. In case you don't know who I am, I'm a lead developer advocate currently working at Gradle. Last time I was here, I was working for JetBrains, so you might have seen me do stuff with IntelliJ IDEA. The key theme that brings together all the stuff that I've been doing in developer advocacy for like the last 10 plus years is a passion for developer productivity. So I've worked in a lot of jobs where as a developer, things can be somewhat frustrating. And what I like talking about is the tooling and processes that can help improve our day job, where things can be sometimes a little bit frustrating. I recently completed a video training course on this topic. The video training course takes about 90 minutes, and I have 15 minutes. So either I'm going to speak really quickly, or we're just going to cover some of the highlights. The video training course isn't yet available, but if you're interested in it, then I guess come to the Gradle booth afterwards and we can sign you up so that we can let you know as soon as it's available. So yes, developer productivity. Let's talk about what a build scan is, a Gradle build scan. Audience participation time. Who has heard of a build scan? Okay, that's good, because if you've heard of it, you shouldn't really be here, because like, you've already used it. Who's using Gradle? Okay, about half of you. Who's using Maven? The other half of you with some overlap. Okay, that's about normal. So a build scan is, we like to call it an X-ray of your builds. So it's an ability to see everything that's kind of going on with your build system. And Gradle's build scan supports Gradle, Maven, Bazel, if you pay for it, and SBT. SBT is free. So it's free for Maven, Gradle, and SBT. So what I want to do is I want to show you, firstly, how to create one, and then we can hopefully take a look at what it is and why it's helpful. Let's start with Gradle. I've got a Gradle project. It's a pet project. It's a single module. It takes 26 seconds to run all the tests and stuff. So if we want to run this with build scan, well, firstly, let's show you the documentation. It says, can you see that? Run it with --scan. So it's pretty easy, really. So if we run our build with --scan, let's not clean it. Let's just run it with. Can't see anything with that there. Should we open the terminal? I like doing everything inside IntelliJ IDEA, but you know, whatever. No, let's not do that. So let's run our build. We are going to run Gradle W clean build --scan. I don't need to do a clean. Okay, the first thing it will do is it will tell you it's publishing your build data to, in this case, scans.gradle.com, and it asks your permission to do that. You should, of course, read the terms of service. I've completely read those, definitely accept those. Say yes, and it will publish your build scan. If this is the first time you've done this, it may open up a browser window and ask for your email address so that you can activate the build scan. Because I've done this before, I'm not going to get that. So I should be able to click on this. There you go, you can activate it. But that is the wrong browser window, because like when you're working with profiles, everything is just so much more difficult. There it is. Let's bring this in. Honestly, not sure how to get Chrome to do what I want it to do, because it will never focus on the right thing at the right time. So click on that. Hopefully it opens in the right Chrome window, and then we have our build scan. Let's make that a bit bigger so you can actually see it. So this is a Gradle build. Does this work? I've never used this before. Ooh. Okay, it's easier to do this. This is a Gradle build. It tells me I'm using the Gradle Enterprise plugin. It's a product. We have a product called Develocity now. It used to be called Gradle Enterprise. It's the same plugin that we use for build scans, but you're not using Gradle Enterprise or Develocity, so I'm not going to do the sales pitch on that. This is the free thing. So then this is what our build scan looks like. It shows you if you've got any failures, if you've got any build deprecations specifically for Gradle. It shows you which tasks were executed, the build time, 2 seconds. took 27 seconds. Tests that were run, any projects, especially for multi-project builds, that's more helpful. And then it shows you all the dependencies. What you can do with all of these is you can click in to get more information. So for dependencies, if you click into that, it takes you to the same place on the side. So there's links in two places, one on the main summary page and one on the side. And this will show you 215 dependencies. And so I can go in and have a look at all of those things. That's fascinating. So it shows you dependencies and the build dependencies, so things like plugins and so forth, plus the plugins. This, I think, is where it can get quite helpful. It shows you any switches which are turned on, things like whether you're using the daemon, whether you're running stuff in parallel, whether you're using the build cache, and the infrastructure, operating system, version of Java and stuff that you're using to run the build. And I'll talk a bit more about those in the future. So the idea is it kind of shows you all of the relevant information for your build. I will drill into those in a bit more detail. Let's run one for Maven, because I don't want Maven people feeling left out. So Maven build scans. Perhaps I should have put my glasses on because I cannot see what's going on here. Build scan. So then we can create a build scan for Maven. It's slightly more involved than just adding ---- scan, but it's not much more involved. So if I open up the Gradle project, it's a similar kind of thing. Just paste that in there. It will set up my... let's have a look at the changes. Hold on, let's zoom this. No, not that. Well, that didn't really improve things, but okay. So what it does is it adds a Develocity Maven extension to your extensions XML, and this is how it's going to publish the build scan information. And then if we run the build, let's run the build. I will also have to accept the terms and conditions and have a look at the build scan. Note for, again, click on the right link. It is relevant, particularly if you're working in the banks, etc. Your build data is being published to an external URL, scans.gradle.com. So if you want to play with build scans, just be aware of that. Some of your employers might not want you doing it on your production code. You could use an open source project or something like that, or one of your own pet projects if you want to play with it. If you want to try this out on your actual production code and you're not allowed to send it outside, that's what Develocity is for. So come and speak to the Gradle folks on the booth to talk about that. So for a Maven build, you get the same kind of thing. You get the information about the fact that it's a Maven build, which extension it's using. You get the same information, more or less. You get failures, which goals were executed, build time, tests, dependencies, extensions, switches, and infrastructure. So it doesn't really matter which build tool you're using. It shows you the same kind of information. So the question really is, why would I want to use a build scan? What is a build scan useful for? Probably the most important thing is to see what really happened in the build. So when you're running a build locally, you do get a view of the console output. Obviously, you get to see, did it pass, did it fail? You can have a look at the tests and so forth. The build scan pulls together all of the information which might be relevant to the build, so you can see it all in one place. And so this way we can get an idea of exactly what happened in the build, including which dependencies it really used, not just the dependencies you asked for in the build file, but it will tell you, like, you asked for version 2.5.3, but we used 2.6 or whatever. Let's see if I've got an example of that. So if we have a look at some build scans so this is the Groovy project. This is a Gradle build. It's very small here. So if we look at dependencies, we can have a look there's a tiny little search button at the top, which kind of allows us to see some interesting stuff. So we can see things like selected different from requested, and it will show us everywhere where the dependency, zoom please, where the dependency that it used was actually a different one from the one that you asked for. And this can be extremely helpful, right? Because when you're troubleshooting problems with builds in particular, you don't always get visibility over exactly what's on the class path. And so this is a really good way of seeing exactly what was used. You can also see, for example, the dynamically resolved dependencies too. So again, kind of helpful for figuring out like how reproducible are your builds. Because if it's dynamically resolving stuff, when you run it in one place, it might be different to where you run it in another place. So it's really helpful for that. The other thing it can be really helpful for is, so the console log, if you're running, you can enable build scans for your local builds or for continuous integration. So right now I want to focus on just why it's helpful for your local builds. For your local builds, I mean, you already get a console output and stack traces and stuff, so maybe that's not so relevant for this. But you get all of this information, the console log, any failures, like I said, deprecations and so forth. What can be really helpful is if you're having trouble with the performance of your build, the timeline and performance tabs kind of give you visibility over what's happening in your build performance-wise. So, for example, the Groovy project has enabled parallel has enabled parallel for the Gradle build. So it runs the tasks in parallel, and so you can sort of see that visually, and you can see how long certain things took, and it can be sorted by duration. So you can order execution, order longest. So you can see, not surprisingly, it's the test task that took the longest time, and the test task took 8 minutes to run in this build. So that's what's taking the most amount of time when you're running this kind of build. And the other thing is there's also a performance tab which will allow you to drill into those things. So how long, let's zoom in. How long did it take? What's the split between initialization, configuration, and execution? Details of the configuration, and so on. I'm not going to go into these in that much detail because my instinct is there are build engineers who find this kind of thing very, very helpful. But for most developers, when they're trying to troubleshoot their build failures, they're not necessarily looking at the ins and outs of exactly what's happening here. I'm pointing this out because it's quite a helpful set of information if you find that some of your builds take a long time and you want to take a look at why that might be. From a developer's point of view, I think the most helpful tabs on here are the console log, the failures, the tests, dependencies, and probably things like the custom values and switches. The other things are kind of more helpful for, I think, for build engineers and people who are specifically looking for potential problems in the build itself. Oh, I've got 4 minutes left. So what's the most important thing to talk about? So the other thing I want to talk about in terms of performance is I have a build scan for Maven here, and this is Apache Camel. This particular build took 5 hours and 4 minutes, and one of the reasons is because it runs everything serially. So you get no parallelization there. So everything has to be run one at a time. And this is quite a good way of visualizing that. It's a Maven project, but Maven supports parallel execution too. So just because you don't necessarily get it out of the box doesn't mean you can't use it. So the build scan can be quite a good way of figuring out ways to optimize your build if performance is something which is interesting to you. So it's helpful for seeing what really happened in the build. Now, I think that's really helpful for local builds. What I think is really helpful for is looking at what happened in CI. So if you have this enabled in a CI environment, for example, then you as a developer don't have to bother some CI engineer about like, okay, what type of agent was it running on? What was the operating system? Which version of Java did it use? Where are the dependencies? How can I have a look at the log? You don't necessarily have to do all of that. You can take a look at the build scan and see all the information of what happened and why it happened. And then you can do a comparison, like maybe locally it passes or fails in one way, and in CI it passes or fails in a different way. And you can compare those things using the build scan. You get visibility over exactly what happened. But what I think is really powerful about build scans is the ability to troubleshoot. My experience working with builds is that most developers are pretty competent at dealing with build and test failures that happen like all the time, the sorts of things they discover frequently. But often there's like one person in the team or even one person in the organization who's like the build person. And when something weird happens with your build, you want to ask the build person, like, what is this error and how did it happen? And often what happens when something goes wrong, particularly in your local machine, is that that person's going to ask you a bunch of questions about what did you run? What have you got enabled? What's your operating system? Which version of Java are you using? Can you show me the log files? And so it becomes quite difficult to troubleshoot that problem because there's a lot of conversation beforehand. Now, imagine you can pass that person the build scan and say, this is the build that failed. This is the exact error. This is what was going on. They don't have to reproduce your problem. They can kind of see everything that they want from the build scan itself. What's even more interesting is that not only can you share the actual individual build scan, because obviously the build scan has a URI you can share up here, but let's say you want to drill into, I don't know, let's say you decide to show them that, let's order this by longest, let's do 1 hour, and you say, look, I actually want to point specifically to that this task on this page took a long time. You click on the little sharing link, and then when you copy that, let's see if I can do that, it will take you directly to the specific area that you're looking at. So you can point someone else to a specific problem in the build. And that's not just on like the front page of one of these tabs. If you have something in the console log, yes, let's not do it on Camel because it's absolutely huge. Let's try it here. So let's say somewhere in here, there's some stack trace right in the middle of the console log. You can say, actually, can you just like link directly to this bit here? And then when you share that with someone, they can see exactly what you're looking at and exactly what the problem is. And this is very, very difficult to do when you're troubleshooting local builds, because until you grab someone and tell them to look at your laptop, it's really difficult to show them exactly what you're seeing. So that's basically it, because apparently I'm out of time already. 15 minutes is not very long. So if you take away one thing from this, I think that build scans are kind of helpful for getting all the information about your build, but what they're most helpful for is the ability to share that with other people and collaborate with other people on problems with your build. Thank you very much for coming to my talk. Please come and see us and talk to us at the Gradle booth. And if you want to, and if you want to try them out, this QR code takes you to scans.gradle.com so that you can have a look at how to get started with build scans on your own project. Thank you very much.